If you see these symptoms from your friends while camping, do not approach or attempt to help. Run and call 911. By Let's Split Up. It wasn't my dog, but that's what the police are saying. That my precious bazooka killed those people. That she just snapped. That she's a bully breed and broke into the cabin and mauled them. I'm facing charges for the deaths of the family who were staying there. What happened was a tragedy, but whatever killed them wasn't my dog. It's still out there, up in northern Minnesota, on that small picturesque lake where we rented the cabin. I hope this warning reaches people. To those who believe I'm responsible, Bazooka would never have done such a thing. She was a good dog. I know she has an aggressive name, but that's because it's the name she came with when I adopted her from the rescue group. She was an untrained pit lab mix, black with a white muzzle and paws, and she was like a wrecking ball on 4 legs with the propulsion of a rocket. I couldn't change her name because after a month of me trying to call her Beverly, she still only answered to Bazooka. But what she lacked in intellect, she made up for in affection. Every night, she crawled onto my bed, all 70 pounds of her, and then after pushing her off a few times, eventually I'd give up and let her stay. At any time I opened my eyes, I'd find her muzzle almost in my face, her dark eyes gazing onto mine, like she was memorizing every feature. Bazooka was everything to me, and I just... sorry for going on. I miss her. Anyway, so about the cabins. We had a rental for the weekend. See, my friend Jake and I both like board games, and sometimes we got together with this couple, Ray and Rashida, who are also board game geeks. Jake was always talking about how it would be fun to have a weekend board game getaway at a cabin. Ray and Rashida were into the idea, and I agreed as long as I could bring my dog. So we rented this lakeshore cabin that shares the beach with a neighbouring cabin and a couple houses across the water, like a postcard. Kayaks and canoes docked for our use, a grill, fire pit, wood pile. Spacious too, with a balcony, deck, and bedrooms upstairs as well as in the basement. Perfect for a gaming getaway. That first afternoon, we cooked hot dogs and veggie burgers out on the grill and played board games on the balcony table. The only downside was when I went out to take my dog for a walk and noticed 2 boys down by the water, one of them peeing off the dock into the lake, the other ripping up a pool noodle and throwing pieces at ducks and laughing when they tried to eat it. On my way back from walking in the woods, the same 2 kids, now dressed, had guns slung over their shoulders as they headed out into the trees. Who lets children run around the woods with guns? They couldn't have been more than 12 years old. I mean, I guess people out in rural Minnesota do that kind of thing. For me, coming from the city, it was pretty alarming. I decided from then on I'd keep my dog on a leash. I just didn't want to risk her being near those boys whose behaviour was so disrespectful to nature and animals. But I didn't let them sour my evening. After our next round of board games, we started up a fire and sat around it roasting marshmallows and drinking. We sat like that under the stars, just talking, and it was the closest I'd felt to anyone in a long time. The next morning I woke up at the butt crack of dawn because Bazooka was whining to go out, and I dragged myself up and stumbled out in a robe, opening the door for her and forgetting for a moment that I'd resolved to keep her leashed. As the morning air hit me, I woke up enough to go out after her and found her sniffing around the docks. I frowned because that's when I noticed the kayaks out on the water, but nobody in them. Presumably the kids again, causing mischief, but at least it was quiet for now in the neighbouring cabin. I took Bazooka back in after she finished her business. Once everyone was up, we went out on the lake for a canoe trip, with Bazooka leaping out into the water and paddling around, and then nearly capsizing us when she tried to climb back up. After a lunch of homemade pizza, we spent the afternoon back at our board games until the sun lowered in the sky. Ray and Rashida wanted s'mores, but since we didn't have any marshmallows and chocolate, they decided to drive into town. That left Jake and me at the bonfire, sipping beers and watching the stars come out in the deepening twilight. We were so busy marvelling at all the stars you could see out here that we didn't hear or notice anything until Bazooka's deep, throaty growl alerted us. All the hairs on my neck stood on end. I looked out blearily across the fire. By now, I'd had enough beer to be buzzed. And beyond the flames stood one of the kids. The younger one, 11-ish. He was dripping wet as if he had come out of the water, all but naked in swim trunks that had come untied and were loosely slipping down his hips to the point of immodesty.
Jesus, fuck.
Jake gasped, his big hands going to his chest. He sputtered on his beer.
Almost gave me a heart attack, kid.
Bazooka stood a few feet from the kid, head down, hackles raised, that low growl still deep in her throat. "Bazooka," I called, and she glanced at me, but kept growling until I snapped her name louder, and she reluctantly came to my side. But still, that rumble sounded from her chest.
Kid? Everything okay?
Jake was asking. He heaved himself up and went over and snapped his fingers in front of the boy's face.
Kid? Kid?
The boy's head slowly turned, glazed eyes lifting to look at Jake. A line of drool dribbled from the boy's lower lip, silvery in the firelight. "Is he all right?" I said.
I'd better get him to his parents. Maybe he's having some kind of episode.
Jake clapped a hand on the boy's shoulder and steered him along the grass onto the dirt pathway leading over to the other cabin. I was glad Jake took him. I didn't want to admit it, but I was fully creeped out by the kid's 1,000-yard stare, as well as by Bazooka's behaviour. She'd never been a bright dog. Sliding glass doors were impossible for her. She always rammed right into them. And she was equally mystified by doggy doors. Her playmate Rocky had a doggy door at his house, and every time he went through the flap, she stared afterwards like it was magic. But she had good instincts, and she sensed something definitely wrong with that boy. So did I, if only I'd listened to the feeling in my gut. The night was nearly pitch black by the time tyres crunched in the gravel. Ray and Rashida were back. I heaved a sigh of relief because Jake still wasn't back from the other cabin and I was getting concerned. Music played from their car, and as they stepped out with bags of groceries, I called to them and explained that Jake had brought the boy to the neighbouring cabin and hadn't come back. Ray and Rashida peppered me with questions. Was he sick? Did you call an ambulance? What kind of symptoms did he seem to have? After a brief discussion, I locked up Bazooka and the three of us made our way over to the neighbouring cabin. Moonlight shone down on us, casting the world in a silvery light as our footsteps crunched in the gravel. It was eerily quiet, the only sound Bazooka's barking, more and more distant. I heard her pawing against the glass door. Good thing she didn't know how to use the doggy door, or she'd have come charging after us. Though honestly, I'd kind of wished I'd brought her. Even with three of us, I was anxious, a pit of dread in my gut, an instinctive dread that I now wish I'd listened to. When we knocked on the door, it swung in slightly. The cabin was pitch dark inside.
"Hello?
Called Ray.
Hello?"
Silence. We shined our flashlights around. The cabin was nearly identical to ours, but the floor had a scattering of clothes and a towel. Seems the boys just threw their stuff down wherever they went. Ray fumbled along and found a lamp, switched it on. Her shriek made me jump. For an instant I swear my soul left my body. Then I saw what had startled her. There, standing in the centre of the cabin's rustic living room, was Jake. He was swaying, his lips slack and his eyes sort of wobbling to and fro. and then he collapsed. He was a mountain of a man, and the impact shook the floor with a resounding thud. Somewhere below, I thought I heard an echo or another thud, like someone else moving.
Jake!
Ray was next to him in an instant, checking his pupils, his breathing. He was breathing slowly but regularly, his eyes still open, though he did nothing except look slowly at whoever was talking. Ray mostly, though his eyes moved to me when I said, "I'm calling 911.
I'm going to look around and see if I can find anyone,
said Rashida. I don't remember the next moments very well, just that I was on the phone with the dispatcher, trying to explain the strange sequence of events and the symptoms of the boy and now Jake, while Ray was speaking at the same time, trying to talk him through whatever he was experiencing, trying to ascertain what was wrong with him. And then just as the dispatcher was telling me how soon help could get there, a scream rang from above, then rapid footsteps. Rashida rushed down, shrieking,
A woman! There's a woman up there with her face ripped open and blood everywhere.
Even as she rushed down the stairs, I saw the figure coming up from the opposite direction, ascending the stairs from the basement and lurking behind her. The boy, still clad only in his swim trunks, had dripping hands and red smeared across his face. I raised my arm to point, gasping, and Rashida saw my expression and turned and screamed as the boy lunged at her. Ray saw him in that moment too and shrieked. The boy knocked Rashida to the floor, shockingly strong and fast. He bared his bloody teeth. I think he'd have tried to eat her face the same as his mother, but at that moment a black blur shot out of nowhere. 70 pounds of ferocious pit bulls slammed into the boy's scrawny body, knocking him off her. Apparently in this moment of crisis, Bazooka had figured out the flap door. "Run!" I shouted. "Run!" I yanked Rashida towards the front door. Ray hesitated, still kneeling over Jake, but there was no way she could lift him. Even with 3 of us, would have needed time to move him, and we didn't have that. She rushed after us. The 3 of us burst out into the night. "Bazooka, come! Come!" I shouted, but the snarling sounds from the boy and dog continued inside. Ray and Rashida dashed into their car.
Come on! Come on!
Ray called to me. "I'll be right behind you. I can't leave Jake and my dog. Go, get help," I shouted. The tyres squealed over the gravel as they took off, leaving me alone in the gravel road under the moonlight. No company but the 911 dispatcher's tinny voice still on the phone. As soon as they were gone, it struck me how foolish I was, how exposed and helpless, and most of all, how loud the dispatcher's voice was, shooting questions at me. I hung up the phone and rushed into our cabin and shut the door, hurried to find my keys. My keys. Where were my fucking keys? I finally found them on the coffee table by the fireplace and turned to rush to the door and froze. There, just outside on the deck, standing in plain view through the glass sliding doors, was Jake. Just standing there, staring in, his eyes sweeping to and fro, like he was looking for someone. I ducked down behind the sofa and crawled towards the door. Froze at the sound of the deck door sliding open. He'd entered the cabin. Was he feeling better? The urge to call out nearly brought words to my lips, but this time my instincts overrode the impulse. I stayed quiet. Jake's heavy footsteps took him across the room. He wandered upstairs. Should I call to him? And then I had an idea, a way to be sure. My iPad was downstairs in the basement. I tugged out my phone, shifting it to silent mode, and called my iPad. Heard the jingle from my phone calling it. And then, heavy thuds. Jake came barreling down the stairs, charging at top speed, knocking over a potted plant at the bottom of the stairs and heedlessly crashing down towards the basement, Not a normal reaction, not at all. Panic sent sirens through my brain. I couldn't open the front door without him hearing the latch. The sliding door to the deck was still open. As silently as possible, I slipped out and rushed along the moonlit dark out to the gravel. My car was parked a ways up the hill, close to the stacks of firewood. Each step away from the cabin, I breathed a little easier, until I heard a soft crunch on the gravel ahead of me. I shined my phone's light. There, standing in front of my car, was Bazooka. Her head hung low, droopy. She listed to one side. Her mouth hung open, and her eyes stared at my flashlight. No. Not you too. A wave of terror and exhaustion hit me. I was so sure I was doomed. She's so fast, there was no outrunning her. But even more than feeling afraid, I was upset. I took a step toward her and only stopped myself at the last second. Bazooka, I whispered. Her snout lifted, and then to my shock, her tail moved. A slow wag, side to side. Bazooka, are you still in there? I drew a shaky breath as I waited for her to attack me, and when she didn't, I mustered myself and said in my sternest voice, "Sit." For a long moment, she stared. Then her haunches wavered. She sat. "Stay," I said. I walked around her and got into my car and looked at her. She was watching me, her jaws still slack in the same way as the others had been. Her eyes followed me. I could feel myself tearing up as I said, "Good dog," and her tail thumped. And then I drove away. I still don't know what was in those woods. The body of the younger kid in swim trunks had Bazooka's teeth marks from where she had defended us, and because of that, they apparently concluded she must have been responsible for mauling the woman upstairs and a man who must have been the kid's father. The oldest boy's body was not found, and Jake's death was listed as heart attack. And Bazooka is still missing. To be honest, that's been the hardest part. I know I shouldn't say that when human lives were lost, but losing my beloved dog has been worse than the blame, worse than the charges I'm now facing. I wonder if there is some part of her that remembers, even now. If she's still in those woods, running wild with her empty eyes, running and listening, waiting to hear her name be called again. I just want to thank the author, Let's Split Up, for allowing me to narrate this story. I also want to thank the guest narrators for taking time out of their busy schedule to join me on this story. Make sure you head over to their pages and show them some love. I'll leave a link for the original story from Let's Split Up in the description below, as well as links to the other narrators' YouTube channels, Mr. Sleepless, Ponch Monster Studios, and Lady Spookaria. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.